What's up, my fellow Shield Brothers? Shield Brother 6 here with another A Day in the Life on this wonderful Monday. Today we're going to be talking about A Day in the Life, the armament of the Highland Warrior of Scotland. And the Highland Warriors we're going to be talking about today, it stretches roughly from the time period of 1314 to 1746. So let's get started, and let's see where this goes. So real quick, let's talk about the history of the Highlands so we can understand what we're talking about with the usage of the Highland Warrior in Scotland. Well, in 1314 is when Robert the Bruce defeats the English at the Battle of Bannockburn, and that marks the beginning of Scottish independence. And after that, the clans have developed from tribal and feudal systems, and all members of the clan are related to a common ancestor through the male line and are led by their laird. Also at this time, Catholicism is the primary religion, with the Kirk having strong influence in the government. But then sadly in 1746, the Jacobites, which were trying to restore the Scottish throne, are destroyed at Culloden, and Bonnie Prince Charlie has to flee to France, marking the end of Scottish independence from England. And with that, let's continue today talking about the Highland Warriors and their usage and weaponry. But first, before we get into that, if we're going to talk about the Highland Warriors and their weapon usage, we must talk about the Highland Charge. So the Highland Charge was a battlefield shock tactic used by the clans of the Scottish Highlands, which incorporated the use of firearms and shock scare tactics. But prior to the 17th century, Highlanders fought in tight formation, led by a heavily armored warrior elite who carried heavy battle axes such as Dane axes or claymores, or sometimes halberds. Such formations became very vulnerable very quickly. So as a result, in the 17th century, Highlander warriors developed a lighter, one-handed, basket-hilted broadsword that protected the hand to use in combat. But the Scottish and Irish warrior Alastair MacCullagh is sometimes credited with inventing the Highland Charge during the Wars of the Three Kingdoms. It was meant to meet a particular set of battlefield challenges of the Scottish Highlands and terrain at that particular time. And it was initially known as the Irish Charge because it was first implemented in Ireland by Montrose's Irish Brigade. But before the Irish used it in Scotland under Montrose. And again, they used it in Scotland. So the use of the charge greatly resembled older Celtic fighting styles of battle in which one side would rush the other trying to break the line of battle. So what the Highland Charge was anyone with a firearm of sorts, would be a flintlock musket or a flintlock pistol or wheellock pistol. They would fire off a volley and then drop their firearms and their horn of powder and then charge the other side trying to break through the line and gain success. Well, this was successful for a time, but eventually it became outmatched and outgunned by the British. But if you're wondering why they would drop their firearms after firing, because firearms are expensive, well, it's very simple. They understood it as this: if they fired and dropped it, if they won, they could always come back and get it. If they died, they wouldn't need it anymore. But if they lost, they wouldn't be encumbered by their powder, horn, and guns. They'd be able to run away much quicker if they lost the battle without their firearm. So due to that, that's why they dropped their firearm after they fired the first volley and then charged in the Highland Charge. So I digress, let's continue with the actual armament of the Highland Warriors today. So the Highland weapons. Well, first off, let's talk about range. There's 4 ranged weapons primarily used by the Highland Warriors. So first one would be bows and arrows, or boas and dorlocus in Old English. So bow and arrows were used up until the end of the 17th century in Scotland and were used for hunting and battles. Very normal, very iconic, hunting, battles. See it all the time in movies, you know what I'm talking about. Well, boas is the old spelling of bows, and dorlocus means quiver, so it's just bow and quiver. And that was used for a very long time. And there was also the culveringus, or cannon. The culverin is a piece of artillery that had the same caliber and fired the same type of size shot as cannons at the time. But this culverin was a quarter to a third longer to the cannon, so it had a much larger range and a much larger firepower. However, it was very inaccurate, so it was not often used, especially in the terrain like the Highlands. The caliber of a culverin was about 13 centimeters in diameter, and the shot weighed a massive 1,800 kilograms. So that's the culverin that they sometimes were used by the Highlanders and in the Highlands, or just by the British in general of this time. So let's continue. Well, the other range would be the dag or pistol and the muskets, as I said earlier. So the Scottish flintlock pistols were very unique in the fact that they were made entirely out of steel. And they were also very popular weapons with the Highlanders, and they were very ornate. There were a couple weapons very ornate but also very practical used by the Highlanders. That would be the pistol, the musket, the dirk, and the targe or shield. So underneath the pistol there, you can see the ornate set of Highland flintlocks from the time period. Made entirely out of steel, but very ornate, but very good shot. Very accurate, very strong. Very good looking, too. Also, there was the muskets. These are fewer in number in records and findings, mostly because they were costly weapons. You know, very more expensive to buy, more expensive to build. And their use was confined heavily to the comparatively wealthy of the clans and upper class of the hierarchy. But down below you can see a ornate musket flintlock from the time period. So those would be the two firearms often used by the Highlanders, especially in the Highland Charge and in the later periods of the Scottish warfare. So let's talk about the iconic hand-to-hand of the Scottish warrior. So of course there would be the broadsword, which had the basket hilt, and there would also be the dirk. So from the mid-16th century, the basket hilt swords were in common use in Scotland, but by the turn of the 18th century, the Highland basket was reaching its full pattern, full peak, and they were used everywhere in the northern British Isles. And the idea of a basket to protect the hand on the sword first came to England and then Scotland from Scandinavian and German sword makers of about, late 15th century, early 16th century, roughly. Down below you can see a set of different types of basket broadswords from Scotland. Also, there would be the battle dag or the dirk. The dirk was a long stabbing knife up to 50 centimeters and would be held behind the targe. And there you can see a normal looking one, but sometimes they're even more ornate than this. And both of these were the very common used, very iconic hand-to-hand weapons of the Highland warrior. But the Highlanders were also very known for, their ingenuity and using whatever on hand they had. So, of course, if we're going to talk about the Highlander, we have to talk about the Claymore, because the Claymore is an iconic weapon that descended from the Gallowglass warriors and just very iconic weapon of the Highland warriors and just Scotland in general. So the Famous Claymore, which first made its appearance around 1490, was developed by the Hebridean Gallowglass warriors, a iconic group of elite warriors of Scotland. This early Highland version measured between 53 and 60 inches overall, and would wax and wane depending on the time period and where you were. Because later in time periods, the Claymore had a shorter length, and that was when it was used in mainland Europe. But also, after that, it also got longer again. So depending on where you were and what time period, there was a slight variation in how long the Claymore was. But the Claymore is an iconic and very strong weapon. It's not only beautiful in its make, but it's also very devastating in the right hands. The Claymore could heft horses' heads off, it could chop through two men at once. It was a beautifully devastating weapon in the field of battle, especially when being charged by a Highlander in a Highland charge, because if you're just a British soldier and you turn to a hill and there's this Highlander coming down half naked, bearing down on you with a Claymore, it's a pretty terrifying sight. But I digress, let's talk about the halberd. Well, if you haven't seen my polearm video, the halberd, or battle axe, was a Swiss invention which was a combination of a spear and an axe on a very long handle. In Scotland, it was a direct descendant of the old Gallowglass. And down below you can see a very normal looking example of a halberd. Halberds were great in their functionality and wide range of how you could use them. You could use them as a pike, as an axe, or just to whack people off of horses. Very wide array of how you could use it, and very strong weapon for the average man. So let's talk about a little bit of more melee. Well, of course we have to talk about the Lochaber axe. The Lochaber axe took many incarnations in the centuries, although all of them had a few elements in common, including the curve of the axe blade and the hook. It was a heavy weapon used by infantry for defense against cavalry and as a pike against infantry, because you could stab infantry, or you could also use it as a heavy axe, and the hook, as you can see on the back of the axe head there, was used to hook riders off of their horse and then be able to chop them and finish them. So it was a very iconic weapon, and it looks like it evolved from a farm tool? Probably because it did. So let's talk about the Highland Targe, or shield. The form of the Highland Targe is round. It's a very normal round buckler, usually from 19 to 21 inches in diameter. It is constructed of 2 layers of some light wood, usually fir. The grain of the one layer would cross the other angularly, and this would make a double strength in wood because of how the layers would line up, and then add extra strength for blows because of the cushion added. And the pieces were then doweled together, and then oftentimes there was a piece of leather on top, which was oftentimes ornate with engravings, carvings, etc., or etchings, as you can see in the example down below with the Celtic symbols. And there was also usually studs or rivets in it. But the rivets weren't only just ornate. They were very useful in deflecting and absorbing the shocks of chops and blows from other warriors on the opposite field of battle. So those pommel and those rivets would be very useful in observing and deflecting those blows. So not only was it a good looking shield, it was also a very useful and strong shield, which really shows the ingenuity and brilliance of the Highland Warriors at the time. So let's continue. Here is an artist's depiction of a Jacobite with that round buckler I talked about, holding his basket-hilt sword. So the Jacobite is a very iconic Highland warrior, and it's oftentimes what most people think of when they think of the Highland Warriors. There's usually 2 things people think of when they hear Highlander. They either think of, well, maybe they think of the Highlander show, or they think of Braveheart, or they think of the Jacobites. So the Jacobites were the ones who were trying to restore the Scottish throne, but ultimately failed, losing Scottish independence. But they were a very good example of Scottish honor and type of warfare used, including the Highland Charge and just the weapon array I just talked about. But as much as I love the movie Braveheart, it is very inaccurate in the weaponry used and also the tactics and how the battles actually played out. But I digress. The Highland Warriors were a very iconic and great type of warrior class in Scotland and in the world. Thank you so much for watching. This has been Shield Brother 6 with another A Day in the Life on this Monday. Catch next Monday for another What If Monday, and on Thursday you can expect a normal video. And as always, I hope you enjoyed, I hope you learned something, and as always, this has been Shield Brother 6, and I'll catch you next time. Alba bràth.